Sarah Martinez had dreamed of serving her country since she was 12 years old. Growing up in a small Texas town, she watched her older brother leave for the Marines and never return from Afghanistan. That loss didn't break her spirit, it made her stronger. She spent years training her body and mind, pushing herself through college while maintaining perfect grades and excelling in every physical challenge she could find. When Sarah finally enlisted in the Navy, she had one goal that seemed impossible to everyone around her. She wanted to become a Navy SEAL. For decades, this elite fighting force had been exclusively male. The physical and mental demands were considered too extreme for women to handle. But Sarah didn't care about what others thought was possible. The training was brutal beyond anything she had imagined. For months, she endured Hell Week alongside male candidates who towered over her small frame. She carried logs that weighed nearly as much as she did. She swam in freezing ocean water until her lips turned blue. She ran miles through sand dunes while instructors screamed insults designed to break her will. Many of the men quit. Some collapsed from exhaustion. Others simply walked away when the mental pressure became too much. But Sarah never gave up. When her body wanted to surrender, she thought about her brother. When her mind told her to quit, she remembered why she started this journey. The instructors watched her carefully. Some seemed to hope she would fail, proving their belief that women didn't belong in special forces. Others began to respect her determination as weeks turned into months. She wasn't the fastest runner or the strongest swimmer, but she never stopped trying. She helped struggling teammates instead of leaving them behind. She volunteered for extra duties when others complained. After 18 months of the most demanding training in the military, Sarah achieved what many said was impossible. She became the first woman to complete Navy SEAL training and earn the coveted Trident pin. The ceremony was small and quiet, attended only by her instructors and fellow graduates. There were no cameras or reporters. The military wanted to see how she performed in real missions before making any announcements. Sarah's first assignment took her to a forward operating base in Syria. The team she joined had been working together for 3 years. They were professionals who had completed dozens of dangerous missions together. When they learned a woman would be joining their unit, reactions were mixed. Some were curious to see what she could do. Others worried that she might not be able to keep up when lives were on the line. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Mike Thompson, had served for 15 years and led some of the most dangerous operations in the Middle East. He was known for being fair, but demanding. He treated every team member the same way. He expected excellence and wouldn't accept anything less. When Sarah arrived at the base, he looked her up and down and simply said, "Prove yourself." For the next 6 months, Sarah did exactly that. She excelled in reconnaissance missions that required patience and precision. Her smaller size allowed her to move through spaces that would be impossible for larger team members. She was an excellent marksman and had a natural ability to read people and situations. Most importantly, she earned the trust of her teammates by always having their backs when things got dangerous. The team's biggest test came when they received orders for a rescue mission. Intelligence reports indicated that 3 American aid workers had been captured by a terrorist group operating near the Turkish border. The hostages were being held in a heavily fortified compound, surrounded by armed guards. It would be one of the most dangerous operations any of them had ever attempted. The rescue mission required weeks of careful planning and surveillance. Sarah found herself assigned to the most dangerous part of the operation. She would need to infiltrate the compound alone, locate the hostages, and signal their exact position to the rest of the team. It was a job that required someone small enough to avoid detection, but skilled enough to handle unexpected complications. As the team prepared for the mission, Sarah noticed something troubling. Several higher-ranking officers had arrived at the base, and they seemed very interested in her involvement in the operation. She overheard conversations questioning whether a woman should be part of such a critical mission. Some suggested that her presence might compromise the entire operation and put American lives at risk. Chief Thompson defended her abilities, but Sarah could see the pressure building. The mission had attracted attention from Pentagon officials who were watching to see how the first female Navy SEAL would perform under extreme conditions. She realized that this wasn't just about rescuing 3 hostages. Her success or failure would determine whether other women would ever get the chance to serve in special forces. The night before the mission, Sarah couldn't sleep. She checked and rechecked her equipment, going over every detail of the plan in her mind. She knew that dozens of military careers and the future of women in combat roles might depend on what happened in the next 24 hours. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any log she had carried during training. When dawn came, the team moved out toward the target compound. They traveled in unmarked vehicles across rocky desert terrain, staying off main roads to avoid detection. Sarah felt her heart racing as they got closer to their destination. This was what all her training had prepared her for, but nothing could completely eliminate the fear and uncertainty that came with real combat. The compound sat on a hill surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Intelligence photos showed at least 20 armed men patrolling the area. The hostages were believed to be held in a building at the center of the complex. Getting in and out without being detected would require perfect timing and a little bit of luck. As planned, Sarah separated from the main team and approached the compound from the north side. She moved slowly through tall grass and scattered rocks, stopping frequently to observe guard movements through her night vision scope. After 2 hours of careful movement, she reached the outer wall without being spotted. The wall was 12 feet high and topped with razor wire. Sarah used a small explosive charge to create a hole just large enough for her to squeeze through. The explosion was silent but left a gap that anyone could see in daylight. She would need to work quickly before guards discovered the breach. Inside the compound, Sarah moved like a shadow between buildings. She could hear guards talking and laughing, completely unaware that an American soldier was moving through their stronghold. She located the building where intelligence suggested the hostages were being held and carefully approached a window on the ground floor. Through the window, she could see 3 figures tied to chairs in a small room. They appeared to be alive but in poor condition. 2 guards sat nearby playing cards and drinking tea. Sarah counted at least 6 more guards in the hallway outside the room. Getting the hostages out would be more difficult than anyone had anticipated. She signaled the information to her team using handheld radio equipment. The response came back immediately. They were moving into position for the assault. Sarah's job now was to disable the guards in the hostage room and protect the civilians until backup arrived. She had perhaps 10 minutes before the compound would be swarming with enemy fighters responding to the attack. Sarah knew she had to act fast and precisely. She moved around to a side entrance of the building where the hostages were held. Using lock-picking tools she had mastered during training, she quietly opened a door that led to a storage room adjacent to where the prisoners were kept. Through the thin wall, she could hear one of the guards getting up from his chair. Her heart pounded as footsteps approached her hiding spot. She pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath as the guard walked past without noticing the slightly open door. When the guard returned to his card game, Sarah made her move. She slipped through the doorway and into the room where the hostages were held. The 2 guards were so focused on their game that they didn't notice her until it was too late. Using non-lethal techniques, she quickly and silently neutralized both men before they could raise an alarm. The 3 hostages, 2 men and 1 woman, were barely conscious from days of poor treatment and little food. Sarah cut their restraints and whispered that she was there to rescue them. One of the men, a doctor who had been providing medical care to refugees, looked at her with confusion and hope. "Are you really American military?" he asked in a weak voice. "Yes, and we're getting you out of here," Sarah replied while checking each hostage for serious injuries. Outside, she could hear the sound of helicopters approaching and gunfire beginning to erupt around the compound. Her team was starting their assault right on schedule. Sarah knew she had to get the hostages to a safe location within the building until extraction was possible. She helped the 3 civilians move to an interior room with no windows, where they would be protected from stray bullets. The building shook as explosions went off nearby. Through her radio, she could hear her teammates coordinating their attack on the compound's defenses. "Phoenix 1, what's your status?" came Chief Thompson's voice through her earpiece. "Packages secured, moving to safe room," Sarah responded using their code words for the hostages. "Roger that. Heavy resistance at main gate. Estimate 15 minutes to reach your position." 15 minutes felt like forever when enemy fighters were searching every building for the escaped prisoners. Sarah could hear boots running through hallways and doors being kicked open as guards searched for the hostages and whoever had freed them. She positioned herself at the entrance to their hiding room with her weapon ready. The 3 civilians huddled together behind her, still weak but beginning to understand that rescue was really happening. The woman, a teacher who had been helping refugee children, kept thanking Sarah repeatedly. Save your thanks until we're all safely out of here, Sarah whispered back. The sound of fighting was getting closer. Through the walls, she could hear her teammates moving through the compound, systematically clearing buildings and eliminating threats. But enemy reinforcements were also arriving, and the battle was becoming more intense than anyone had planned. Suddenly, footsteps stopped right outside their door. Sarah raised her weapon and motioned for the hostages to stay completely quiet. The door handle turned slowly as someone tried to enter the room. Sarah's finger moved to the trigger as she prepared to defend the people she had risked everything to save. The door burst open, and 3 armed men rushed into the room. Sarah reacted instantly, using her training and superior positioning to neutralize the threat. The brief firefight was over in seconds. But she knew the noise would attract more enemies to their location. "We need to move now," she told the hostages while helping them to their feet. But as they prepared to leave the room, Sarah realized they were surrounded. Enemy voices could be heard from multiple directions, and there was no clear path to safety. She would need to make a decision that could determine whether any of them survived the next few minutes. Sarah made a quick decision that went against everything she had been taught about following orders. Instead of waiting for her team to reach her position, she decided to move the hostages toward the sound of fighting where her teammates were, advancing through the compound. "Stay close to me and do exactly what I say," she told the 3 civilians as she led them out of their hiding room. Moving through the building was like navigating a maze while under fire. Sarah had to find a route that avoided enemy fighters while heading toward friendly forces. She used her knowledge of the building layout from surveillance photos to guide them through storage rooms and maintenance corridors. The teacher was having trouble keeping up due to her weakened condition. Sarah had to practically carry her while still maintaining security for the group. The 2 men helped as much as they could, but weeks of captivity had left them all barely able to walk. Through her radio, Sarah could hear that her team was facing heavier resistance than expected. Enemy reinforcements had arrived faster than intelligence had predicted, and the compound was becoming a battlefield with no clear safe zones. Phoenix 1, "We're taking heavy fire at the main building." Chief Thompson's voice crackled through static. "What's your position?" "Moving packages toward Building 3, Sarah responded while checking around a corner for threats. "Negative. That area is not secure. Hold your position and wait for extraction." But Sarah could see enemy fighters moving toward their previous hiding spot. Staying put was no longer an option. She made another command decision and continued moving the hostages toward what she believed was their best chance of survival. As they reached a stairwell, Sarah heard footsteps above them. She signaled for the hostages to stay back while she investigated. 2 enemy fighters were coming down the stairs, apparently unaware of her presence. She waited until they were close enough, then acted swiftly to eliminate the threat before they could alert others. The group continued through the building, moving floor by floor toward the sound of American weapons. Sarah's training had taught her to recognize different types of gunfire, and she could distinguish between enemy AK-47s and the M4 rifles her teammates carried. When they finally reached the ground floor, Sarah could see the main entrance where her team was fighting to secure an exit route, but between them and safety were at least 8 enemy fighters who had taken defensive positions behind concrete barriers. Sarah realized she would need to create a distraction that would allow her teammates to advance while giving the hostages a chance to reach safety. She had grenades that could clear the enemy positions, but using them would reveal her exact location to every fighter in the compound. She made radio contact with Chief Thompson one more time. "Phoenix Lead, I have packages ready for pickup at Building 3 main entrance. Need immediate support for extraction." "Roger, Phoenix 1, we see your position. Prepare for coordinated assault in 30 seconds. Sarah turned to the 3 hostages and explained what was about to happen. "When I tell you to run, you move as fast as you can toward the men in American uniforms. Don't stop for anything." The attack began exactly as planned. Sarah's grenades cleared the enemy positions while her teammates advanced from multiple directions. In the confusion of the assault, she was able to get all 3 hostages safely to her team's position. But as they prepared to leave the compound, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. One of the hostages, the doctor, was not who he appeared to be. His behavior during the rescue had been strange, and now she could see him making subtle hand signals toward enemy positions. "He's not a hostage," Sarah shouted to her team. "He's working with them." The revelation came just as enemy fighters launched a final desperate attack on their position. The fake hostage tried to grab a weapon from one of her teammates, but Sarah was ready for his move. The real battle for survival was just beginning. The discovery that one of the hostages was actually working with the enemy changed everything. Sarah's quick thinking had prevented him from getting a weapon, but now they were trapped in a compound with enemy fighters attacking from all sides and a spy among their group. Chief Thompson immediately secured the fake hostage while his team fought off the intensifying attack. The man who had been posing as a doctor began shouting in Arabic, apparently giving away the team's positions to the enemy fighters outside. "Shut him up," Thompson ordered one of his men while returning fire through a broken window. Sarah positioned herself to protect the two real hostages, the teacher and the aid worker, while scanning for escape routes. The original extraction plan was no longer possible with enemy forces surrounding the building. They would need to fight their way out or find another way to reach safety. The building shook violently as rocket-propelled grenades struck the walls. Enemy fighters were willing to destroy the entire structure to prevent the Americans from escaping. Sarah realized they had perhaps minutes before the building became too damaged to provide any protection. "We need to move to the roof," Sarah suggested to Chief Thompson during a brief lull in the fighting. "Extraction helicopter can reach us there." Thompson nodded and began coordinating with their air support. But getting to the roof meant traveling through 3 floors of a building while under constant attack. They would have to move the 2 civilian hostages and their prisoner while fighting enemy forces on every level. Sarah volunteered to lead the way since she had studied the building layout most carefully. She would clear each floor while the rest of the team protected the civilians and moved up behind her. It was dangerous, but staying in their current position meant certain death or capture. The climb through the building was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during training. Enemy fighters seemed to appear from every doorway and corridor. She had to use every skill she had learned to stay ahead of the team and eliminate threats before they could endanger the group. On the 2nd floor, she encountered a heavily armed fighter who had been waiting in ambush. The brief fight left her with a shoulder wound that made it difficult to use her rifle effectively. But she pushed through the pain and continued clearing the path to the roof. When they finally reached the top floor, Sarah could hear the sound of rescue helicopters approaching in the distance. But enemy fighters on nearby buildings had positioned themselves to fire at any aircraft that tried to land. The roof extraction would be just as dangerous as staying inside the building. Chief Thompson made contact with the helicopter pilots and coordinated a plan that would require split-second timing. The aircraft would approach fast and low, while the team provided covering fire against enemy positions on surrounding buildings. As the first helicopter came into view, enemy fighters opened fire from multiple positions. Sarah and her teammates returned fire while the 2 real hostages stayed low behind air conditioning units on the roof. The sound was deafening as bullets ricocheted off metal surfaces all around them. The helicopter pilot showed incredible skill in getting close enough for extraction, despite the intense ground fire. But as the aircraft hovered over the roof, Sarah noticed that the fake hostage had somehow gotten free from his restraints. He was moving toward a weapon that had been dropped during the fighting. Without hesitation, Sarah threw herself between the spy and the weapon. The impact sent both of them sliding across the roof toward the edge. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought they might both fall to their deaths. But she managed to grab onto a roof ledge, while the enemy agent disappeared over the side. The helicopter crew helped pull her back to safety, just as the aircraft lifted off with all team members and both real hostages aboard. As they flew away from the compound, Sarah could see fires burning throughout the facility and enemy vehicles arriving to search for survivors. But even as they headed toward safety, Sarah knew that the most difficult part of her mission was still ahead. Questions would be asked about every decision she had made during the rescue. Some people would focus on her successes, while others would criticize any mistakes or deviations from the original plan. 3 weeks after the rescue mission, Sarah found herself standing in a conference room at the Pentagon facing a panel of senior military officers. The mission had been successful. 2 American civilians had been rescued and valuable intelligence about terrorist operations had been gathered, but questions had been raised about some of her decisions during the operation. The investigation wasn't unusual for such a high-profile mission, but Sarah knew that as the first female Navy SEAL, she was being scrutinized more carefully than her male counterparts would have been. Every choice she had made was being analyzed and debated by people who had never faced similar situations in combat. The panel included generals and admirals who had decades of military experience. Some seemed supportive of her actions, while others appeared skeptical about whether women belonged in special operations roles. The questioning went on for hours as they reviewed every detail of the mission. "Petty Officer Martinez," said Admiral Richardson, the panel's senior member, "you made several decisions that deviated from the original mission plan. Can you explain your reasoning for moving the hostages before receiving orders to do so?" Sarah stood at attention and responded clearly. "Sir, the tactical situation changed rapidly, and I assessed that following the original plan would have resulted in casualties among the hostages and team members. I made command decisions based on real-time conditions, and you felt comfortable making those decisions despite your relative inexperience in combat operations?" asked General Watson, whose tone suggested disapproval. Before Sarah could answer, Chief Thompson stepped forward. "Sir, if I may, Petty Officer Martinez's actions saved the mission and possibly the lives of all team members. Her decisions were sound and based on excellent tactical judgment." The questioning continued for another hour, covering every aspect of the operation. Sarah answered honestly about both her successes and the moments where she felt she could have performed better. She refused to make excuses or blame others for any problems that had occurred. When the formal questioning ended, Admiral Richardson asked everyone except Sarah to leave the room. She remained standing at attention, unsure what to expect from this private conversation with one of the Navy's most senior leaders. "At ease, Petty Officer," the Admiral said, gesturing for her to sit down. "I want to speak with you frankly about your future in the Navy." Sarah sat down but remained alert and focused. She had heard rumors that some officials wanted to transfer her to a less visible position to avoid continued controversy about women in combat roles. "There are people in Washington who believe your presence in special operations creates unnecessary complications," Admiral Richardson continued. "They think the military should focus on fighting wars rather than conducting social experiments." Sarah's heart sank as she prepared to hear that her career as a Navy SEAL was over before it had really begun. She had proven herself in training and combat, but political considerations might end her service regardless of her abilities. "However," the Admiral continued, "there are others who recognize that you have demonstrated exactly the qualities we need in our special operations forces: courage, intelligence, adaptability, and absolute dedication to mission success." He paused and looked directly at her. "The truth is, Petty Officer Martinez, that mission would have failed without your contributions. The intelligence reports make that clear. You saved American lives and dealt a significant blow to terrorist operations in that region." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty about what would come next. Admiral Richardson stood up and walked to the window, overlooking the Pentagon courtyard. "The question now is whether you're prepared for what comes next. Being the first means that everything you do will be watched and evaluated. Success will be expected and any failure will be magnified." "Sir, I understand the responsibility," Sarah replied. "I just want to continue serving my country to the best of my abilities." The Admiral turned back toward her with what might have been the beginning of a smile. "In that case, Petty Officer Martinez, report to your new commanding officer on Monday. You're being assigned to one of our most elite units for your next deployment." As Sarah left the Pentagon that day, she realized that her journey was just beginning. She had proven that women could serve effectively in the most demanding military roles, but now she would have to prove it again and again. She was ready for that challenge.